The road to conquest is a road well traveled, stretching out from the moment man conquered fire to the present. Countless men and women, named and nameless, have walked it, their footprints forever fossilized into its blood-soaked bedrock. Barbarians, slavers, militarists, kings, you name it, all have made their mark. Some have made more indelible marks than others. Of course, the road to conquest has not been paved by just implements of warfare. Yes, the sharp and the explosive have done their fair share of damage, but the biggest culprit has always been prejudice, intolerance, avarice, vengeance, those basis of attitudes found within the boggy muck of the human mind. The writers of Bioshock understand this, and play with the idea by adding other titles to the roster of conquerors, that of the Captain of Industry and the Anarchist. Ken Levine really seems to favor the former, as our introduction to the series started with the most notable captain of all, a Russian immigrant turned magnate. But as of now, let's get acquainted with another, a man of fortune who's as much a captain as he is a Fink. And we'll see how his odious enterprise leads to the birth of another conqueror, the Anarchist. Jeremiah Fink has made quite a name for himself in Colombia. In the city's short history, he has become one of its richest, most influential citizens. And like many of Infinite's characters, Fink is a man of many faces. He is a capitalist, investing in businesses that play vital roles in the city's populace. He is an industrialist who founds the most lucrative manufacturing conglomerate in all of Colombia. He is also a fraud. Everything he's amassed through trickery and theft. What he hasn't stolen, he's bought out. What he hasn't bought out, he's eliminated. Jeremiah Fink is a Fink in more than name alone, and worse off, his unscrupulous nature runs in the family. Jeremiah has a brother. The brothers Fink, Albert and Jeremiah, were likely a part of Colombia from the beginning. Jeremiah's earliest recorded voxophone is dated March 27, 1893, a little over a month before the unveiling of Colombia at the World's Fair.
The truth is, I don't have a lot of time for all that prophecy nonsense. I tell you, belief is just a commodity. Old Comstock, well, he does produce, but like any tradesman, he's obliged to barter his product for the earthly ores. You see, one does not raise a barn on song alone. No, sir. That's Fink timber, a Fink hammer, and Fink's hand to swing it. He needs me, lest he soil his own.
Jeremiah cares little for Comstock's divinations. In fact, he cares little for divinity at all. What matters most to him is the prophet's reliance on the resources he provides, a business agreement which was likely brokered either prior to or during the construction of Colombia. Following the city's completion, the brothers Fink forego their earthbound residence and relocate to the floating city. Jeremiah continues his business ventures, establishing a conglomerate of his own, while his brother Albert pursues a career as a professional musician. It should be stated that there is nothing known about Albert or his accomplishments prior to the appearance of Tears in Colombia, which likely means he was unsuccessful in his endeavor. Of course, as we know, he won't wallow in obscurity for long. Shortly after the launching of the city, many Colombians were beginning to feel disillusioned with their Eden, as they were still subject to the responsibilities of everyday life.
Hey, you want to watch out? I just swapped that.
To them, what good is a utopia if you still have to scrub your own toilet? the prophet searches for a solution to the problem and finds it in the mustachioed dissolute of Jeremiah Fink.
I told you, Comstock. You sell 'em paradise, and the customers expect cherubs for every chore. No menials in God's kingdom. Well, I have a man in Georgia who'll lease us as many Negro convicts as you can board. Why, you can say they're simple souls in penance for rising above their station. Whatever eases your conscience, I suppose.
Jeremiah proposes to have African American convicts sent to Columbia to work off their crimes as indentured servants. Great news for the upper-class citizens of the city, who no longer have to sully their pampered hands with the menial. They are at long last free to kick back and enjoy Columbia like the utopia it is meant to be. Of course, the unfortunate truth is, one man's utopia is another's dystopia. African American convicts are moved to Columbia en masse and are put to work immediately, being forced to do all manner of mundane and inhumane jobs ranging from maid work to manual labor. They become the city's underclass, existing subordinate to the other members of Columbia's lower stratum, such as the Irish, the Chinese, the Jews, the Mexicans, and the Native Americans. Similarly to the treatment of blacks in antebellum America, Columbia's underclass are legally viewed as property rather than people. Nowhere is this more apparent than in Finkton, the massive warehouse district that not only serves as the epicenter of Fink's manufacturing conglomerate, but also as a home away from home for many of the underclass employed there. It's here where Fink's exploitative business practices are at its most heinous.
Now, some say to me, Fink, why is it that we get paid in tokens that are only good at the company store? Well, I'll tell you what, I'll be damned if I let any of you poor folk get robbed at some shady establishment. You see, the Fink company store brings you Fink products at a price designed specifically for the Fink worker.
Instead of paying his workers the currency of Columbia, the silver dollar, Jeremiah Fink compensates them with tokens, which can only be traded in at Finkton shops and businesses. To make matters worse, the hours and manpower needed to earn tokens are beyond cruel.
We need a pipe fitter here. Crimp a pipe on Pearl Street. Starting bid of 20 minutes. Can I get 19?
18.
18 minutes bid, now 18.
17.
17 minutes bid, now 17.
14.
14 minutes bid, now 14.
10.
10, now 10.
9 and 50.
9 and 50. Any lower now?
9 and 10.
9 and 10.
9. 8 and 33.
I hear 8 and 33. 8 and 33. 8 and 33. We got our fitter in the green shirt.
I need this job.
That's a Fink man, an efficient man.
Employees of Finkton are so desperate to earn their wages that they not only willingly subject themselves to unhealthily long shifts, but they also fight amongst each other for the crumbs. Even crueler, Fink ascribes to a form of social Darwinism in which he parallels industry with that of the animal kingdom. His ideology situates himself and other wealthy aristocrats at the top like lions, while relegating the underclass to that of cattle.
Do it? You're a lion. But you can't blame me for looking after my own interests, can you? Now I know Fitzroy has come calling, but I think you'll find your business with her has come to an end. Lions walk with lions, DeWitt, not hyenas.
It's an iniquitous system, one that is mirrored by a society that is supposed to adhere to the teachings of Christ. Of course, if there's one thing history has taught us, it's that true theocracy and morality can't coexist. The urge to conquer will always prevail. This is clearly exemplified in Columbia's systemized white supremacy, which is expressed through the city's upper class. They segregate themselves from the middle and lower classes by identifying themselves as the founders. The moniker was likely chosen for two reasons. The first being a way to indicate how they see themselves as the founders of Columbia. And the second is due to their ideological heraldry of the founding fathers of the United States, specifically George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. This self-installed hierarchy stacks the odds against the underclass. It means despite all their efforts, they will always remain hungry and without proper shelter. A visit to shantytown is a test of one's empathy, a test most of Colombia's upper class would fail. Here they'd find a pitiful township of starving and sick youths, a slum of dog-eat-dog one-upsmanship stoked by desperation, by fear, and they'd feel nothing.
Pawn my watch, pawn my chain, pawn everything that was in my name.
To the wealthy, the lower and underclasses are burdened by their own lot in life, a lot decreed from on high by the Almighty, with the prophet acting as his executor. Considering this, it should come of no surprise that Finkton is a veritable powder keg. And in the face of that hypocrisy, an aggrieved woman will do what she can to set that wick alight and blow it all to kingdom come. That woman is Daisy Fitzroy. Not much has been revealed about her pre-Columbian life. However, according to the Mind in Revolt short story, she was convicted of a crime and imprisoned while back on the surface. Though unspecified, it's likely whatever offense she committed was either a minor infraction or not a crime at all. Historically, and even still today, it was quite normal for African Americans to be accused of committing crimes unfoundedly. When the emancipation of blacks was legalized, many governmental systems, specifically within the South, found ways to perpetuate slavery through other means. Innocent behavior became criminalized, which gave the police all the authority they needed to make an arrest. For instance, some blacks were charged with vagrancy, which was the punishable offense of a person not being able to prove they are employed. It's a flimsy justification for an arrest, but it was all the justification they needed. Those convicted were sentenced to work off their crimes doing hard labor, and their sentences were often extended greatly due to the prisoners being unable to pay off the myriad of fees they owed to the court and state. This is but an example of the many concoctions cooked up by southern states to keep African Americans in chains, both literally and metaphorically. Douglas Blackman of the Wall Street Journal asserts that slavery did not end with the Emancipation Proclamation. He argues that it persisted for another 80 years, in a period he refers to as the Age of Neo-Slavery. Daisy is a victim of this age, as she states in Mind in Revolt, quote, "One with my complexion, the law finds something to take offense to," unquote. As we know, convicts were sent to Colombia to work off their crimes. Daisy was just one of the unlucky chosen.
When I first seen Colombia, that sky was the brightest, bluest sky that ever was. Seemed like heaven. Then your eyes adjusted to the light, and you saw that sea of white faces looking hard back at you.
Mind in Revolt elaborates further on this, revealing that it wasn't just convicts who were sent to Colombia. In Daisy's words, quote, "Some of us had sentences that got waived. Some got families to feed. A few got drunk down below and woke up here, I tell you," unquote. It seems Fink's men stooped to abducting minorities, similar to the way 18th and 19th century press gangs kidnapped men and conscripted them into naval service for the British Crown. Sometime after her arrival, Daisy is moved to Comstock House, where she is tasked with tending to Lady Comstock's needs as a scullery maid.
Days at Comstock House was simple. Hard work, sure, but simple. Wringing the linen, scrubbing the floors. Lady Comstock, she even had a kind word now and then. Almost enough to make me think I had a place in their world. God made foolish girls so he could have something to play with.
It's likely Daisy was chosen for the role due to her gender, though it's always possible she was selected for her intelligence. Mind in Revolt tells us Daisy has a genius-level IQ, excelling in areas of verbal communication, memory, attention, and so forth. While I suspect Daisy had the foresight not to flaunt her intellect while under Lady Comstock's employ, I would guess that she still displayed a wit and astuteness which made her a curiosity in their eyes. We don't know the extent of their relationship, if one could even call it that, but it's safe to say Daisy probably got to know the First Lady on a more intimate level, not through one-on-one exchanges, but through observation. Daisy remembers her fondly, saying, quote, "She weren't a bad sort for someone put on such a pedestal. She had rough times growing up. When she spoke to people, you knew she meant it. She was genuine. not like that snake who shared her bed, unquote. And as Daisy states in her Voxophone, Lady Comstock would sometimes speak kindly to her as well, and it gave her the impression that she might have had a place in their world. If the First Lady was as earnest as the narrative makes her out to be, then who knows? Maybe Daisy might have found her way into the good graces of the founders. Maybe she could have found an ally in the First Lady, and together, they could have sparked a movement which could have resulted in generational improvements for the minorities in Colombia. Maybe. But things don't turn out that way. As we know, Lady Comstock is assassinated. Though I assert that the deed was done by Fink through a hired gun, it's never revealed who actually did the First Lady in. It could have been Comstock himself for all we know. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. The woman is killed, and another is set up to take the fall.
They argued something fierce at night, Lady Comstock and the Prophet. Could never make out what it was about from my bunk, though. After the worst, I seen she ain't left for morning prayer. So I crept upstairs to check in on her. And like a fool, I lingered. Scullery maid was what they called me when I walked into Comstock House. Murderer was what they shouted when I ran out.
Daisy flees from Emporia and into Finkton, the only place a person of color can go unseen. She seeps into its darkest crevices where she will one day inspire a movement, different from the one it could have been. This movement will be forged of blood. In the months leading up to the assassination of the First Lady, Albert Fink makes a remarkable discovery. A curious phenomenon has appeared in his studio, that of a tear. And through it, he sees other dimensions. Albert hears music flowing through it. The melodies prove enchanting, but the instrumentations are downright queer, utilizing instruments unpleasant and strange to his 19th century ears. Albert, like the Fink he is, steals the melodies as his own, using period-appropriate instruments for the arrangements. His career takes off, and he becomes the most celebrated musician in all of Colombia, releasing hit after hit of plagiarized pop songs appropriated for turn-of-the-century sensibilities.
Would still go on, believe me. The world could show nothing to me. So what good would living do me? God only knows what I'd be without you.
Albert eventually contacts Jeremiah to tell him of his discovery so that he may exploit it as well. His brother, however, thinks him a madman. That is, until August 12, 1894, when Jeremiah sees a tear for himself.
I had thought you a fool, dear brother, when you told me that you heard wonderful music trumpeting from holes in the thin air. I began to doubt your mental integrity. But not only have you made your fortune from these doodads, you have lit the path for me as well.
It's never specified whether Jeremiah saw one of the errant tears appearing throughout Colombia, or if Comstock showed him the Lutece device. Ultimately, it proves to be an irrelevant tidbit. What matters is that Jeremiah uses the tear in the same way his brother does, spying on the genius of others to appropriate their ideas for the Colombian market. On November 14, 1894, Jeremiah Fink opens a tear, and he sees something incredible.
My dear brother, these holes in the thin air continue to pay dividends. I know not which musician you borrow your notes from, but if he has half the genius of the biologist I now observe, well, then you are to be the Mozart of Colombia.
The tear shows him a man, a geneticist. Jeremiah steals this man's research, using it to create drinkable tonics called vigors, which grant supernatural abilities to those who consume them. Powered by a substance called salt, these tonics can produce a myriad of effects. Some allow users to expel gouts of elemental energy from the body, while another allows users to ensnare machines to their will. Fink maintains a monopoly on all vigors sold throughout Colombia. Even the ones not manufactured by his company, such as Marlowe's Murder of Crows, are presented by Fink Manufacturing alongside his own line, so regardless of who produces the vigor, it's Jeremiah Fink raking in the dividends. On October 20th, 1958, in an entirely different timeline, the geneticist whom Fink pirated the idea from discovers a tear of his own.
Suchong observed strangest of coincidences. On other side of a window, man in strange hat experimenting on Suchong's own creation. On plasmid. Man name of Fink. Outrage! Theft of intellectual property! But man name of Fink is no fool. Through addition of oxidizing agent, turns plasmid ingestible through stomach lining. Mr. Ryan very impressed with Suchong's initiative. Theft of intellectual property. Two-way street.
Yi Suchong hails from a world very much like the one Colombia is from, except in this world, there is no city floating amongst the clouds. Instead, the city of imagination can be found beneath the waves, an Art Deco metropolis called Rapture. We won't go into too much detail about Suchong, but it is important to understand his role in the creation of plasmids in order to piece together how it ties to Colombia. Suchong is a Korean-born genetic researcher who is using a substance extracted from underwater sea slugs to create serums called plasmids. It's from these which Fink plagiarized the idea for vigors. The two have similarities and differences. For instance, plasmids give users supernatural abilities, ranging from heightened intelligence to being able to produce fire at the snap of a finger. Unlike vigors, plasmids are injected into the human body, and consistent use results in substance dependency, which ultimately leads to physical and mental degradation. Why this is never explicitly stated, but it's implied that the method of usage may be the reason for their varying side effects. Of course, it could just be what the narrative demands. It should be noted that in the original Bioshock, plasmids were a thematic parallel for substance abuse, which played into the story's exploration of science without morality. Based on the design for the Vigor Junkies, which were Infinite's versions of the Splicers, it seems Irrational Studios had intended for something similar with Infinite, but ultimately scrapped the idea, likely to keep the plot and its themes as concise as possible. Suchong watches Fink steal his idea for the plasmids and redesign it for the Colombian market by making it ingestible. He retaliates by pirating Fink's ingestible formula. This mutual theft of each other's work continues for a while, with Fink eventually realizing that ingestible vigors require more atom to power than Suchong's injectables. However, by the time he comes to this realization, Fink won't be afforded the opportunity to correct his formula. Fink eventually steals Suchong's design for a man-machine hybrid.
These holes have shown me yet another wonder, though I've yet to see the application for it. They illuminate a merger of machine and man that is somehow the lesser, yet the greater of both parties. The process seems to be irreversible. Perhaps, though, Comstock will have some need of this kind of thing to keep watch in that tower he is building.
In Rapture, this hybrid serves the role of protector for the Atom Gatherers, the Little Sisters, which is something we'll explore at the appropriate time. Fink believes that the man-machine hybrid could serve a similar role for Comstock's daughter, whom the Prophet plans to lock in a tower. While not stated outright, this design is likely used in the construction of the Handymen, those unfortunate souls crippled by either disability or terminal illness, who have been bonded to mechanical suits in an attempt to sustain their lives. While their mechanized bodies are created by Betterment Auto Bodies, they are almost certainly presented by Fink Manufacturing, as the tech that went into their construction bears remarkable similarities to the Big Daddies, as well as there being a handyman surgical suite found in Fink's factory. Interestingly, The Boys of Silence are also developed by Fink Manufacturing, as exemplified by the helmet found in the same handyman surgical suite, implying that the Big Daddy bonding process might have been used to create them as well. Eventually, Fink and Suchong begin to communicate with each other. They agree to work together across dimensions, setting aside their contempt for one another in an attempt to solve a conundrum they could not figure out on their own. Specifically, how to imprint their world's respective protectors to their wards. In the case of Fink, this means pairing the young Elizabeth with Songbird, the man-machine hybrid he created using Suchong's research. The relevancy of this plot point is better suited for our examination of Elizabeth in the next episode, so we won't discuss this any further. On March 4th, 1896, Fink inadvertently learns how to bond the Songbird to Elizabeth.
It has occurred to me that this breakthrough regarding the Songbird casts my arrangement with the Oriental Doctor in a new light. What more could be gained by this continued partnership? What secrets that I could not answer for myself? Suchong can only offer table scraps, and Jeremiah Fink has richer meat in mind.
Having no more use for him, Fink severs all communication with Suchong and presumably continues using tears to pirate the work of others in order to expand his own company's market. Sometime between the years 1895 and 1896, a protest group called the Vox Populi is formed. Its leader is Columbia's public enemy number one, Daisy Fitzroy. The Vox stand in direct opposition to that of the founders, whose heraldry of white nationalism and supremacy served to perpetuate the plight of Columbia's lower classes. The Vox initially starts out as a small confederate of minorities. However, it doesn't take long before white citizens who are sympathetic to their cause join their ranks. Eventually, these progressives begin to provide asylum to minorities. Additionally, they promote ideas of acceptance and tolerance through printed materials, bearing the famous abolitionist drawing by Josiah Wedgwood, "Am I not a man and a brother?" This coerces an authoritative response by the Founders Party, who sees this as an attack on their way of life. They respond in a number of ways, the first being violence, as both citizen and constabulary react with hostility to the Vox and their sympathizers. Another response by the Founders Party is the creation of the Fraternal Order of the Raven, which is a group dedicated to avenging Lady Comstock's murder, consisting of white supremacists who glorified John Wilkes Booth. Their ideology and design is overtly inspired by the Ku Klux Klan, though their lodge seems more in line with the architectural stylings used by the Freemasons. Yet another response to the emergence of the Vox would be the establishment of Soldiers Field in 1903. Designed by Father Comstock himself, Soldiers Field was conceived as a means of indoctrinating the youth of Columbia into adhering to the founders' beliefs, ensuring that progressive-minded citizens were kept at a minimum.
Interest is a profit having a bunch of carnies and carousels.
The place is themed to acquaint children with national service.
You mean the military?
Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it.
Did you write that?
No.
The indoctrination of the youth of Columbia was accomplished through use of propaganda disguised as an amusement park, featuring a charming little boardwalk plastered with the image of Duke and Dimwit, a cartoon Boy Scout duo used to promote ideals of patriotism, obedience, and diligence.
Are you a Duke? Or a dimwit? Duke cleans his father's rifle every Sunday without being asked. Dimwit shoots mice every afternoon and puts the old man's rifle back dirty. Remember, boys and girls, don't be a dimwit.
This not-so-subtle bit of brainwashing culminates with the creation of the Hall of Heroes, a museum dedicated to the myriad of historical events which have shaped the life of Comstock. Found here are displays which retell the events of the Battle of Wounded Knee and the Boxer Rebellion, but with whitewashed inaccuracy. This will prove a point of contention for another important character, who we'll get to in a little bit. Also found here is a memorial to Lady Comstock, which further enforces the fiction of Daisy Fitzroy's assassination of the First Lady. As a result of the Founders' campaign, the Vox abandoned all pretenses of peaceful coexistence with him, and Daisy assumes her role as the anarchist. They begin to organize, ultimately transforming into an armed insurgency group. They're outgunned, however, standing no chance of victory in outright conflict. The Vox and Daisy have to embrace subterfuge and secrecy. They establish a coded language called a cipher and use it to communicate with each other without fear of being found out. Still, Daisy knows in order for the Vox to mount a proper defense, they'll need to properly arm themselves, or at the very least, to deal a considerable blow to Columbia's infrastructure. On May 7th, 1909, Daisy attempts to sabotage Columbia's Skyline network. However, the constabulary managed to stop her, and after years of being terrorized, of jumping in fear of every shadow and whisper, the Columbian people finally rest easy. Daisy Fitzroy is arrested. Mind in Revolt details the detention of Daisy in Comstock House, being overseen and examined by a doctor named Francis Pinchot. The short story reveals the extent of her intellect, showing how in less than a week, she adroitly manipulates the doctor into empathizing with her, and depending on your reading, falling in love with her. Knowing that his superiors are intending to lobotomize Daisy, whose mind he becomes infatuated with, Pinchot agrees to help her during a planned prison break. Believing to have formed a connection with her, he gives Daisy his keys as well as all the money he has on him. She thanks him with a bullet to the skull. On May 13th, 1909, Daisy escapes Comstock House, having spurned the regard of a possible ally in the process. To her, all members of the Founders' Party are the enemy, even those who extend their hand in peace. In her words, quote, "Cottonmouth and a copperhead might be different, but when it comes down to it, one snake's the same as any other," unquote. On a side note, Dr. Pinchot's death results with a change in policy at Comstock House, transforming it from a research center to a re-education center. Pinchot's notes proved to be influential in the transition, as most of the experimental behavioral treatments he had theorized about in his notes are put into practice by a doctor named Pettifog. In fact, the version of Comstock House shown in-game is the end result of that change, with reconditioned inmates being forced to wear masks bearing the likeness of the Founding Fathers, and the human security turret that are the Boys of Silence tasked to keep constant vigil over them. Because of the sprawling nature of Infinite's narrative, and because these episodes are purposefully dedicated to only a handful of characters at a time, we will be omitting certain story beats so that we can keep things concise. For instance, we'll be glossing over the deaths of the Lutesses for now. It might seem strange, but I promise we'll expound on it greatly in the next episode. For now, however, in the latter part of 1909, Comstock contacts Fink, asking him to sabotage the machine used by the Lutesses to create tears. In turn, he promises Fink ownership to all of the Lutesses' patents. Being the odious captain of industry he is, Fink agrees, carrying out the deed on October 31st, 1909. And now we're going to head backwards in time a bit. While all these events are transpiring, a former soldier is trying to find his place in a world that has no place for him. When we last saw Cornelius Slate, he had lost an eye to the Boxers. It's probable that he might have felt disenfranchised with life in America in the wake of his loss, as we know he abandons the surface for the blue and white infinite of Columbian skies, likely enthralled by the silver tongue of the prophet. From what we can tell, Slate finds employment at Finkton, as his locker can be found near the elevator to the Plaza of Zeal. He is an officer of the law, earning the respect and trust of his fellow men and women in arms.
God makes all kinds of soldiers, but he only made one Cornelius Slate. My father followed him up San Juan Hill, through the legations in Peking, and as he put it, through hell the order was given. At today's muster, Slate asked me if I was Sergeant Monroe's daughter. I said, "Yes, sir, I am." Slate said, "Your father always wanted a son. I hope the fool has wisdom enough to recognize his good fortune."
At some point in time, Slate begins to take umbrage of Comstock's perversions of history that he himself was a part of. Slate had fought at Wounded Knee, and again at Peking, where he lost not just an eye, but many comrades as well. To him, history wasn't something to be sensationalized, not for propaganda, and especially not for a prophet whom Slate believed have never seen the theater of war.
I served 20 years of soldiering, and every heathen land I've known is less peopled for my passing. I hated no special enemy. Until now. Comstock. Comstock. He's made a vaudeville travesty of my battles and cast himself as the White Knight. I called him out over it, and he stripped me of my rank. That man has never seen the savage face of war. But he will.
Slate confronts Comstock about these claims. The prophet responds by decrying him a liar and stripping him of his rank. He also orders the monuments dedicated to Slate at the Hall of Heroes to be demolished. In the end, Slate is expunged from the records, the Hall of Heroes no longer making mention of his exploits. Adding insult to injury, Comstock venerates his own image as the sole hero in these historic battles, as towering sculptures of the prophet are fashioned to aggrandize his mythology. Quite telling, isn't it, that such a zealous culture isn't without its golden calves? As a result, Slate and a small band of supporters, likely former comrades, recede from the gaze of the founders and seek aid in the most unlikely of places.
They'll call us assassins when our work is done. Cornelius Slate, the swift left hook of the Vox Populi. We'll be trading Comstock's life for a new one. So be it. The Fitzroy woman and I are comrades of necessity. I doubt all the men who reddened Caesar's toga would still be seen breaking bread together in peacetime. With Comstock gone, my men's past deeds will be sacred, and they will claim the spoils due them. I need not live to see it.
Slate and his men break bread with the Vox, establishing a temporary truce. While this might seem a strange turn of events, it makes sense considering that, historically, many blacks fought alongside white soldiers in Peking. It's possible that some of the Vox were former soldiers, and Slate could appeal to their sense of camaraderie, maybe even incense them with Comstock's whitewashing of their military exploits. Either way, Slate is a soldier to the grim end, a man of honor and dignity caring little for the whims of a prophet. He and his followers storm the Hall of Heroes, killing everyone inside. They deface and destroy the monuments within. In their eyes, the hall is not a commemoration to sacrifice or heroism, but to tin soldiers.
Veterans! You shed your heart's blood for Columbia, lost limb and viscera in the godless Orient. Comstock did nothing! And yet, look up! Whose image squats above you even now? At every angle and insult! If the prophet would make a painted whore of our past, what fresh rape does our future hold? Let us now make our stand and fill yonder hole with true heroes!
And so we arrive at July 6, 1912, the start of Bioshock Infinite. Since much of Booker's story will be the subject of the next episode, we're going to be glossing over many details in this section. Booker DeWitt, the false shepherd, has come to Columbia looking to settle a debt, or so he believes. In dire need of some shock jockey, his search eventually takes him to the Hall of Heroes, where he fights wave after wave of Slate's men, warriors clamoring for a true soldier's death. He catches up with Slate and is given a choice: to kill him and grant him the honorable end he so desires, or to spare him and be accused of being that which Slate hates most, a tin soldier. In an ironic twist, the merciful choice is death, for if Booker opts to spare his former comrade, Slate will be apprehended by the authorities and lobotomized. Regardless of Booker's choice, Slate is not long for this world. And neither are the two other subjects of this episode, Fink and Fitzroy. Booker's arrival in Columbia forces the hand of every shaker and mover in the city. Having crossed paths with Booker at the July 6 raffle, Fink conspires to employ him as the head of his security. Fitzroy, on the other hand, believes Booker can help arm the Vox with the aid of a gunsmith located in Finkton. In spite of their machinations, Booker has plans of his own, and though they don't align with the goals of either Fink or Fitzroy, he finds himself having to go along with their designs in order to get what he needs. After some cross-dimensional shenanigans, Booker and Elizabeth end up in a world where the Vox have militarized, a world where the Booker DeWitt of that universe fought alongside the Vox, and had been martyred as a hero of the revolution. The war between the haves and the have-nots was something Elizabeth foolishly expected to be bloodless, something akin to Les Miserables' romanticized depiction of a revolution, of an ostracized people rising up from the muck of inequity to claim justness, but with just a smear of dirt to sully their tired faces. In truth, revolution is a violent and bloody and cruel affair, sparing no soul, offering no dignity, regardless of who you are, whether it be man, woman, or child. In times of upheaval, many good-natured people, people of clarity and foresight, become blood-addled, committing atrocities in the name of the cause. It's easy to cast aspersions on the Vox for the extreme brutality and indifference they showed the founders, but in the end, what more could be expected? After years of mistreatment, of exploitation at the hands of people who showed them no mercy, this bloodshed seems appropriate, and dare I say, necessary. Yes, the Vox may be the ones to put them in the grave, but it was the founders who dug the graves to begin with. In the end, Daisy catches up with Fink. She holds him at gunpoint, as well as a young boy who we can only surmise is his son. This scene would imply that the revolution has left her blood drunk, but of course we know that's not the case, as her character ends up retconned for the Burial at Sea DLCs, but we'll reserve discussing her true motivations for the next episode, as they correlate to the development of another character. For now, however, Booker and Elizabeth watch as the woman whom all of Columbia considered anathema puts a bullet in Jeremiah Fink. Daisy embraces the anarchist in her and threatens to end the life of the child, when Daisy Fitzroy, the leader of the Vox Populi, is killed by the daughter of the woman whom she was accused of murdering. There is no poetry to this, at least not in any way we can discuss now. The captain of industry and the anarchist lay dead, mere feet from each other, their lifeblood carpeting the floor red, the same shade of red the Vox will continue to drape the city in, both metaphorically and figuratively. The founders go murdered in the streets, in their homes, the Vox offering no quarter or mercy. In the end, all is wrapped in flame, from the grand enterprises of Finkton to the anemic burg of Shantytown, both rendered equal in the closing reign of Columbia. All for naught. The Vox go without their leader, but it matters not, for Daisy's plan has been set into motion, a plan that cannot be undone. Not that the Vox would if they could. After all roads come to an end, just as all roads lead home. The road to conquest is no different. Whether or not the Vox make Columbia that home is never revealed. In the end, it doesn't really matter. Not every secret is ours to unearth. Some things, God only knows. God, or goddesses.
I may not always love you, but long as there are stars above you, you never need to doubt it. I'll make you so sure about it. God only knows what I'd be without you.